Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Say What podcast. Here with me today, I have Jeff Dyra, who is a strategic energy advisor at Nania Energy. He is here today to expand into part 2 of our 3-part mini-series regarding the different scopes of ESG. Thank you for being here with me today, Jeff.
Thank you for having me again.
Last time you were on the podcast, you took a deeper dive into Scope 1 and how our listeners could meet their Scope 1 ESG pledge. Before we tell our listeners what they need to know about Scope 2 and how they can meet their Scope 2 pledge, let's start with the definition of Scope 2 emissions.
Scope 2 emissions include indirect emissions from purchased electricity, gas, steam, the heating and cooling used by your company, or the building's consumption during your daily operations. An example for Scope 2 is fuel combustion emissions created at your plant that generated the energy for your usage of your air conditioning, your furnace, your lighting, or the manufacturing machines that you use on a daily basis.
Thank you for clarifying that for me and for our listeners. Now let's get into Scope 2. What should our listeners keep in mind about Scope 2?
I think something to keep in mind is that even if an organization does not own the source that generates the Scope 2 emissions, they still need to understand and measure their amount since the organization's business or property's use is an indirect cause of them. If you are using gas or electrical power to have units function within your property, it's this indirect purchasing that must be measured and tracked. These type of emissions are indirect since they're purchased from outside your business.
So how does a business measure their amount of emissions? And is there a way they can lower or adjust the number of emissions they produce?
Well, first, there are two basic ways organizations report Scope 2 emissions. One is through a location based method, and the other is a market based method. The location based method uses the average emissions from the grid in your location or area to determine the measurement, while the market based method is when a business is under contract with a supplier for their gas or electrical power, and the supplier determines the amount they are using compared to if they were to purchase that same energy through renewable energy credits.
If a business or organization is looking to lower or adjust their number of emissions, like you mentioned earlier, what are the ways they can offset their usage?
A couple of ways companies currently offset their Scope 2 emissions are by using on site solar, entering into what's called a power purchase agreement. Now, there's two types there's a PPA or a VPPA, or the most common is the purchasing of what's called RECs, which are renewable energy credits. Now, what a lot of companies and organizations do is they have a combination of all three of these together. And that's something that we, as energy advisors at NIA, can help walk you through that process and put together a customized plan that fits your organization's situation.
Thank you, Jeff, for providing us with some great advice today, and it was great to be here with you. Stay tuned for our next Say What podcast, where we will finish up our 3-part mini-series with a discussion surrounding Scope 3.